Welcome to Feral Faith, where life is messy, but we're here for it all. I'm Cassidy.
And I'm Amber.
Two friends and moms just trying to survive and thrive in this wild, beautiful chaos.
So we invite you into our living room where things may get a little fierce and spicy as we press in. No sugarcoating here, just real talk, real faith, and wildly present conversations.
We're showing up and letting our roars out. So buckle up. It's about to get real.
This is Feral Faith.
Feral Faith family, this is episode 1, take 4. We are so glad to finally be able to bring you content after some tech issues and a fried motherboard and all kinds of excitement. So welcome.
I have gained such a new appreciation for those who are creators of doing podcasts and other digital, because I'm like, this is such a learning curve.
Yeah.
But we are so excited to begin this journey of starting our podcast. So
Yeah.
I'm Amber.
And I'm Cassidy. And for those of us who don't know us, Amber and I became friends in Colorado about 2 years ago. I was out there with my family at the time, and we recently moved to Wisconsin this past fall with my husband's job transfer. I'm a mom of 3, full-on homeschool, stay at home. I broke up with healthcare back in 2021, so I have fully embraced being home with my family and stewarding my kids from that arena. And I have several animals. I've got some chickens and some ducks, and I'm on the sourdough route. And things have just gotten a little special the last couple of years. So that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, as she mentioned, I live out in Colorado and live in the Rocky Mountains. We have a tiny little homestead up here. We too have chickens and turkeys and ducks and dogs and rabbits and oh my, yes, lots of critters. And wild critters too that like to eat our domestic critters. It's, it's kind of the idea of when we were bouncing around naming this podcast Feral Faith. When we
Yeah.
live with all of these feral animals.
And our children as well. A
And
brood of
and our
children.
children,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. Together it is a fiasco.
Yes.
Um, but Cassie, take us through that definition of feral.
Yeah, yeah. So I heard this from a friend of mine several years ago when she was talking about her daughter being feral. And I was like, wow, that's an interesting word to give your children whom you love dearly, right? But it was, her daughter would be running around the house naked and sliding down the banister covered in paint and, playing with all kinds of stuff. And it's like, that's a really interesting definition of our children. And if you look at feral, if you actually just Google the word instead of assuming it has to do with like a rabid mentality, feral actually means going into a wild state after captivity. Which when Amber and I really started pressing in and saying it's time to make our conversations known for all you people, um, we both sat with this idea of, yeah, we are really in a season of um, being a little more wild and untamed than maybe what modern culture would suggest we should be doing. So that was, and then I also kind of have an alliteration issue, which is a really fun grammatical term for I like things to have the first sound when I'm working on being creative. And we had a bunch of different names, and I was like, yeah, it's not an alliteration though. And then Feral Faith came across our lap, and I was like, oh yeah, that's it.
Yeah. So a little bit of my journey to become feral. I'm a homeschool mom. I have one kiddo left out of my brood of 4. I run a couple of ministries, and I've been walking this feral faith for about 10 years now. I've been a Christian since I was 9, but through just life and my journey, it wasn't until about a decade ago that I really wanted to embrace following Jesus. And when I did so, he took me on a very wild ride. And yeah, so these conversations are going to come from that place of experience of leaving behind some of the man-made institutions and just running fiercely with Jesus, Yeshua, and the family of faith that he's brought around me.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I agree. I've been in a space the last couple of years. I've only been a Christian since 2020, which is a whole other episode for another time. Um, but when I got saved, I kind of went right into that mainstream of what that looks like as being a Christian. For those of us who are still in that system, that's just what I assumed you did. And I started attending church online because it was in the middle of a pandemic. And shortly after going back to people, I realized something just wasn't right. I was really on fire for the Lord, and just seeing discrepancies in what he was revealing to me and what I was seeing in the church, and then add Holy Spirit element into the whole thing. And it didn't take me very long to step away from Western church mainstream, how we see things and how we as the masses are doing things. Amber has an interesting number quote because it's Women's History Month. We are getting this episode solidly recording in Women's History Month, so we are going to stick
Yes.
to that. But
Yes.
yeah, yeah. If you want to go ahead and share what you found about us
Yeah. What
late
was it again? Was it
Florence
well-behaved?
Nightingale. Yeah,
Yeah, well-behaved women seldomly make history. And that's a quote from I think she was a Pulitzer Prize winner, a writer of she was documenting women throughout history, and that was what she came up with is that this what she discovered that women who are going to change history are going to be a little feral. They're going to be a little wild, a little bit spicy.
yeah.
And that's what I see ourselves as, I don't necessarily think that this podcast is going to change history,
No.
but I do believe that it's going to help some folks who are trying to discover like the journey that they're on and maybe some of the conversations that they would like to have, but don't have maybe the friends group to do that with or don't know how to start it. Um, but I picked up a book off of at the library because they had a whole shelf of, Women's History Month books. And one of the ones that stood out to me was Florence Nightingale, partly because some of the conversation we're going to have today will tie in some of our history of who we are as women and the education that we have and some of the experiences that we have. But Florence Nightingale changed nursing because of some of her, at the time, radical ideas and bringing to surface some of the issues that she saw happening in the hospitals, happening in the medical field. And so that happens to be Cassidy's expertise.
Yeah. Yep. So I was in healthcare for 15 years. 10 of those, I was a registered nurse, primarily in emergency room medicine. And when I was in school, Florence Nightingale was a real centerpiece because she's the lamp, right? She's the person who really changed what it meant to be a nurse because she was dealing with some stuff during combat and then was watching these patients in the hospitals going, I don't think we're doing things very clean. Like, why are we not opening windows and why are we not letting them have sunlight and making sure their beds are clean? Just common sense approach to this isn't working and people are sick and dying. And even just taking that notion of something's not working and people are sick and dying, God says, are my people perish for a lack of knowledge, right? And it's not to start throwing scripture at people, but it's just this idea that if we get really rigid in our thinking and we cannot conceptualize outside of it, you could really be missing something. And part of the conversation, this is going to wind up being a two-part conversation. We decided that following up after how many times we tried to
Our
record
multiple
this,
recordings.
multiple recordings and dead computers and all the things. But part of the what we're going to be looking at is sort of just some objective data because we realize we're in a culture where people are incredibly educated. They have data at their fingertips. Now we've got all the stuff with AI, which has been beneficial for us in trying to start this whole thing. But you can search anything and it pulls from outside sources to give you info. And the information Amber and I just kind of want to lay out here objectively because it's not just an opinion. It's sort of saying, here's some data. My dad always says in his line of work, you cannot like me, but you cannot argue with data. And
Yeah.
there's some stuff
But
that,
what started this
yeah.
conversation though was that reel.
Oh,
Remember
yes. Yeah, that's right.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
Amber, one of our connection points, because now I live in Wisconsin and she's back in Colorado, is we like to send each other gifts and memes. And it's just for laughs and giggles, but sometimes we send some things that challenge us and make us kind of take pause. And she sent me this one um, reel as we were wrestling through some of the stuff that's been going on in the church world these last few months that's been pretty heavy. And it was I think she was a paramedic, but it was a healthcare worker in frontline emergency medicine. And she basically said, when I get a patient, I look at them and I triage, which means you make a very quick assessment of the level of care that somebody needs. So it's, are they going to die? Are they at risk for really hurting themselves or someone else? Are they bleeding? Are they breathing? And then you work it backwards, because the more acute or the more sick somebody is, the more care that's required. So she was specifically talking about a patient that comes in clinically dead, meaning they're not breathing, they don't have a pulse. And for those of you who don't have a healthcare background, those are absolutely fundamental in terms of, I need that to live. When you get somebody in healthcare and they do not have a pulse, or they are not breathing, or they're struggling to breathe, or there's issues with their heart, we jump in right away, and it's a multidiscipline approach to keep that person alive. So you might have respiratory therapy, which is the breathing people. You could have anesthesia involved, because they got to put them asleep because we need to breathe for them. There's multiple members of healthcare circling out who's doing chest compressions to keep the heart beating. People are doing IVs. You've got people doing meds. You've got doctors giving orders. You've got paramedics in the background running, and everyone's trying to chart. And it's like a very controlled chaos. And she said, when something like that's going on, the last thing that any of us need is someone who's not a subject matter expert to step in and go, you should really be doing this instead. And it's like, actually, this is what I do for a living. And you don't get to come in here and tell me how to not keep the person alive, because you don't know what you're talking about. You know, we don't need to give them water if they don't have a heartbeat. They don't need a blanket if they don't have a heartbeat, if they're not breathing. So it's kind of this idea that there is an order of importance when you're
Yeah.
dealing with something.
Mm-hmm.
And it struck Amber and I both, but more me so as a healthcare worker, as someone who's done many critical cases on patients. I was like, oh my gosh, this is what it feels like right now, trying to wrestle through the Western church, our modern church culture, and what the numbers are saying. So if I did blood work on somebody and I see critical lab values, we address it immediately, because if you
Mm-hmm.
don't correct certain things on just the metabolic or the cellular level, they can eventually die because of it. And when Amber and I started just pulling some data, we went, okay, these are critical lab values that require emergent treatment, or they're going to die. And I'm just going to throw out some numbers for fun, because I do geek out. I have a master's in nursing. I like data. I like statistics. And it's also, again, irrefutable information. So you cannot, like me, but look at the data
Right.
yourself, like, look at the numbers
Don't get
yourself.
mad at us.
Yeah, just,
We're just bringing it to the light. Yeah.
correct. So one of the things that I wanted to bring up specifically is this whole issue of why we have a mass exodus from the church. So Amber, do you want to tell them how many people have walked out of the church in the last 2 decades?
Yeah, we're up to 40 million people have left the institution.
Right, right. And that's also it's been a million since COVID. So forget about people who
Hmm.
didn't go back after COVID, but a million more
Yeah.
have left since COVID.
Yeah.
Um,
That's a lot of people.
right.
Like we're looking at what did the 2020 census tell us that our population was in North
I
America?
think it's at 100 million,
350
300, yeah, 300 million.
350 million
Yep.
people in North America, give or take. And to think that 40 million have walked away. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. And that's just in the last 25 years. So you can,
Hmm.
again, look at the data. And one of the things from my walk, my journey, that really struck me was this study that I pulled up about religious trauma. And religious trauma is sort of defined as these things that happen under the guise of religion, whether it's physical, emotional, or sexual trauma. And the data that this study projected was actually 15% more than their hypothesis. So they said, oh, yeah, it's going to be this. And it wound up being 15% more on a large sample size study. That's a big number. So they said their conclusions on this one study was that religious trauma affects 1 in 5 Americans. So not just people who say that they are churchgoers, it's 1 in 5 Americans are affected by religious trauma. And up to 15% of that number is suffering from major traumas, which are the things that could get people in jail. So it's not just someone was unkind, I felt not heard or seen or valued. It's sexual abuse or physical abuse or exploitation. 15% of
Yeah.
Americans now, of the 1 in 5, which I
Hmm.
think on our previous recording that is now gone into computer heaven, we said that was like what, 4.5 million people, right,
Yeah.
are
It's,
suffering
yeah.
from that now.
Hmm.
And the quote I took out of this study was, religious trauma is a society-wide phenomenon, a chronic problem in the United States adult population.
Mm.
And it's this idea that there's so many of us who are trying to pursue Jesus or think we're trying to pursue Jesus, and then we're at the hands of people who maybe aren't making good ethical decisions, or they're not in fact following Jesus, making
Yes.
some really unsafe
Yeah.
choices for people.
Hmm.
So you've got 40 million people who've left the church, have not returned, and then another million that have walked since COVID. 1 in 5 Americans are dealing with religious trauma. Then I pulled up another statistic about sexual relationships outside of the marriage. So again, we're talking about, as Christians, we are elevated into a space of trying to be examples in light of the world. And this study was on a pastoral care website, and it separated evangelicals, or people who are very much proclaiming the gospel on the streets, like really trying to live a life of the book of Acts, non-believers, and then born again. So someone like me who didn't grow up in a faith household and then got saved later in life. And they found across the board there was not much of a difference in terms of sexual relationships outside of the marriage for evangelicals, born agains, and Christians,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
non-believers. I forget which one I left out, but it's the same. So it's like,
Yeah.
all right, we've got people experiencing trauma because of the church. We've got marriages that are in breakdown and traumatic situations.
Hmm.
And it shouldn't be that way, right? And then I had
Right.
another statistic about how drug recovery programs are reporting that 30% of participants are churchgoers.
Mm.
So you've got 3 in 10 are believers. And this is again on a pastoral care website, and then AmericanAddictionCenters.org. Like, it's not just an
Mm.
isolated
Yeah.
study, it's
Yeah.
multiple disciplines are starting to look and go, oh, something's not working.
Right. So if
So,
this patient came into your ER, like you already used the word chronic earlier,
yeah,
chronic system failure is
right,
happening,
right.
you would give it an evaluation.
Correct. So if I was to receive a patient, and let's say the patient is the Western church as we know it, the institution of the church, we're going into those 4 walls, there's a pastor on stage, people are sitting in the pew. If I got this patient in and I got this data. So when we get a critical patient, we take vital signs, we hook them up on monitors, we're drawing blood work. They don't look well. It doesn't, or maybe they do look well on the outside. Maybe the image is they do look okay. But then you draw labs and you see what's going on the inside. This is a very sick patient that's going to require the ICU, because there's things that are so imbalanced, and the patient might not be reflecting symptoms of that. So one of the cool things about a human body is they can compensate for a while. So they can thump along and other systems are trying to keep it alive and keep it as close to homeostasis as possible, or to, I can keep you alive as long as possible. Then the system stops. Then it fails. Then the person starts looking really sick. So maybe this person did walk in and they're like, oh, I've just got a little cough. And it's like, actually you have full-fledged pneumonia and you need all the things, and this is going to be a very long recovery process for you. um, this patient I would give a 2, which means they're a critical patient. They're not actively dying, so they still have a heartbeat and they're breathing. Everything else is not working right.
Yeah. Yeah. So something needs to be done, right? Like,
Right. Right. And
yeah.
surprise, we're one of the 40 million that aren't in the church anymore, as we call it. We are still
Yeah.
pursuing Jesus and our King, but we are not in the institution of the church and have left mainstream, hence feral.
Yes. Yes. We're out of the box.
Yeah.
There's an image. I love this one author. If anyone listening wants to go grab a good book to read to kind of understand where maybe they fall in their, if they're leaving the church or got questions, it's called Unchurching by Richard Jacobson. And he has a chapter about how when the calf comes out of the stall and what that's like the veal, these milk-fed baby calves that have been stuck in a box have never developed their legs or their muscles. They don't know what freedom is, and they come out of the stall. There is a moment of just absolute freedom and joy that that little animal experiences for the first time, being able to run around and then go nibble on green grass and run around with all the other animals that are running feral. And it's such a beautiful image that even the psalmist has painted that for us of the joy that we feel when we experience something that is so life-giving. It's like the calves being let out of the stall. And I think that's kind of what we've experienced in our
Right.
friendship and in our relationship. And then others that we're talking to and sharing with, that there's a joy in that you don't have to go to a space to experience Jesus, because if we believe scriptures, he's with us all the time.
Right.
He's in us, he's around us, he's between us, he's everything. He's the very air that we breathe. And kind of looking at like this patient that is suffering from not being able to receive air makes you wonder, do they know the creator of the universe? Do they have that experience with him? Um, so we're not trying to turn this podcast into, browbeating and critical of the church. We just wanted to bring the statistics and open up this conversation for those who might have questions so that that you're not alone,
Right.
you know.
Right. The
We're
power.
two out of the 40 million. So there's more out there
Right.
that might want to have these conversations or might be looking for, like, gosh, am I the only one? We know many of them have not left their faith behind. They've just left the expression of where they're going to go experience their faith.
Right.
Um, but it is something that these conversations we wanted to open up for the public so that maybe you can invite your friends. Maybe you can find a friend to start having these curious conversations with, but we definitely are not turning it into a critical time. This is the beginning of the podcast to just say, hey guys, we have a problem.
Yeah.
Houston, we have a problem. Like, right?
Correct.
There's
Yes.
communication issues. There's real
Sound the alarm.
there's relational issues. I told Cassidy, I was like, we need some background noise of all the alarms of the ER going off so that we could kind of make this real of like this patient is suffering.
Right.
And, this is the body of Messiah and he loves her. We love her. Like we love the body of Messiah. We love each other. We want to like bring people along on this relational experience that we've been having and invite you into having these conversations. Um, so we will dive into these critical chronic issues as we go and unpack them in more detail. But our first podcast was really like bringing us to the surface, like, hey, something's wrong, right?
Right. Right. And then giving voice to people who are wrestling. Because I know in conversations I have with brothers and sisters who are still doing what they know is being a believer and doing the the participation on services and things of that nature and trying to be in relationship with brothers and sisters. They're struggling. They
Yeah.
realize something's wrong, but they don't know what to do about it. And there is not really a public push of, hey guys, there's a way to
Mhm.
do this that's not this indoctrinated pattern that we've inherited. And this is for validation because there's so much power in validation of I've known something's wrong. I've sensed something's wrong. I've been discouraged. My worries have been pushed down. So this is more of a space of, guys, we can validate where you're at and
Hmm.
understand where you're at. And if you're still going to the institution of the church, that's okay. And if you're curious, or or you've left and you're just not sure what to do, that's okay too. This is just a space to wrestle through these challenging topics that are not mainstream or fun to discuss, because it can be uncomfortable, but
Oh yeah,
that's what we
yeah.
do.
Oh, it is. It is. And we're gonna have laughs and probably tears. I mean, there's some conversations that we will probably unpack with you guys. Like, we don't want to necessarily stage this every single time because we want this to see that, what does it look like to be in relationship with someone who you can create a protected space to unpack these conversations with.
Yeah.
And so we will practice those, and we will give space for that. Any other thoughts, Cassidy, for this
No.
first episode about our
Yeah.
triage? We just need some bells and whistles, and oh my gosh, we need to run off and go
Yeah.
start chest compressions. Oh, here was a thought that I think we for on that reel, didn't she say that sometimes in the chest compressions a bone may break?
Yes, ribs will break. Yep, that's
Ribs can
very true.
break,
Yep.
so it can hurt. Like saving someone's life could hurt. it could There could be some more trauma that comes from that because of the life-saving measures that go through it. And I know some people who have walked away from church may have experienced even compounding trauma because then they don't even have a community to be around. They don't have their people to talk to. They might feel more rejected. It might hurt when the wake up call comes that
Right.
this patient is dying, but that's okay because there's going to be life-saving measures, and God is breathing life over those who have decided to walk away. Like
Yeah.
he's doing chest compressions.
Yeah.
He's
Yes.
doing some life-saving measures on them. And so take heart. Don't be discouraged if you are wrestling with these kinds of pictures that we're painting. It might can seem like, oh my gosh, this is so um I was a speaker last year in Denver for an organization that teamed up with the Barna Group to show the loneliness statistics, the isolation statistics that are going on. And they interviewed people on the street. So it was an urban ministry paired up with the Barna Group. And they were just going around and just checking where people, because we do have a mental health crisis in our nation. We have this loneliness epidemic that's going on. And so they were interviewing people and just seeing where they were at with that. And the majority said, yes, they felt lonely. They felt isolated, separated from other humans. And then they asked them, who do you see could be the answer to this? What do you see could be the answer? And they said, we see the church as the answer, which was really encouraging that we do have a mission field. We do have the possibility of actually turning these statistics around. But here's the part that was really a little bit depressing is that the church does not see themselves as the answer because they don't know what to do about it. And so we hope to bring a little bit of encouragement and some ideas too that could maybe bring some changes in your own family and in your own community, that we do have some answers. We do have the availability, the there is a future for the church if we would just stand up and do something about it.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
hopefully we can give some good ideas as we go along too, like what we have done since leaving the institution, and then what others that we talk to have encouraged along the way. And so
Yeah.
yeah, we have some brighter days ahead of us, that's for
Yeah.
sure.
Absolutely. So yeah, guys, stay tuned for part two, because this conversation can go on and on and on. And we look forward to having you guys join us for part two of where we're at and how the church is doing. But thanks for everyone who listened thus far, and be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. You're going to be able to find us on YouTube under the Feral Faith Podcast, and then our website is feralfaithpodcast.com. So go ahead and give us a like and check us out there. Feels so weird to say that officially. All
So it
right,
does.
guys. We will talk to you here in a little bit, but thanks for tuning in this day.
Goodbye.